So how do scientists know how the Earth has changed over time? How do we know what it looked like millions or even billions of years ago? Well, what scientists have discovered is that in order to understand the history of the world, you have to look down through the layers. You have to dig into the Earth and see what came before. So I'm just going to show you a couple of images, and then I'd like to show you some things from the fossil collection. This is from a really good book called A True Book, Paleontology. Paleontologists are people who study life that came before us. And if you look at the image right there, it shows you, this is a big fossil site from the 1800s. It's still there today, it's in England. But you see all those layers? One of the first people to figure this out was actually a young girl named Mary Anning, and she found pieces of what she thought were dragons sticking out of different layers and embedded in different layers in these cliffs. Here's another image just to show you the kinds of sites that geologists, archaeologists, and paleontologists often look through. So the top one is in the desert, and you can see again all those layers. As the canyons form down into the earth, we can look at what rocks are in these layers and sometimes what fossils, and understand what came before. The one on the bottom is pretty cool. That's actually a dig of a whale in a desert, which is pretty amazing. Now, this is also an excellent book that I highly recommend, made by Smithsonian, Curious About Fossils. This is a great book by Kate Waters. And let's just see who the first one is by, because I want to give credit to these authors. Susan Gray. This is also an excellent book if you're interested. Now, like I said, we look for clues that we can find. So I'm going to show you some clues now that people have found. Let's look at this one. This one is actually something that people find pretty frequently, actually, in the American West. And oftentimes you can find this sitting on the surface of the ground. Now this piece is pretty big, but I actually have pieces that are far bigger than this. Now you may be able to guess from the size and the shape what this could be. And I'll just make sure you have a good picture of it there. So I don't know if you can tell. There's a couple of clues. One is that there's this kind of grain going this way and this way, like a striped pattern. And then if you turn it on its end, you can see there's kind of a circular pattern. It's like a quarter circle. So what has concentric, meaning the same center, circles if you cut it open? Well, you may have already guessed. This is a piece of rock now, but it used to be a piece of wood. It used to be a piece of a tree. So it has fossilized, which means that the tree has become rock. So this is what we call petrified wood. Now, if we found this on the ground, and we often do find these on the ground in deserts, what would it tell us about what that desert used to be like? Maybe thousands, maybe millions, probably millions of years ago. Well, it would tell us that there was a forest, right? Let's look at a couple of other ones. Now, sometimes we have to dig through layers to find these things, or look in places like stream beds. These are stream bed fossils. These are also pieces of rock, and I'll show you what they look like on the back side. It's a specific type of rock that forms in these layers. So you can see the kind of, especially with this one, you can see how it formed in a layer. And if I flip them over, you can see what's on the other side. Let me make sure we get a good photo of that. So I bet you can see what shape that is. And let's look at this one. Oops, wrong side, sorry. Let's look at that one. Again, I bet you can tell what that used to be. Now these are both rock now, but they used to be parts of trees. They used to be leaves. These are fossilized leaves. So, like the wood, if we found this in a location, it would tell us that it used to be covered with trees or shrubs or whatever. And also the type. These are the type that grow on a certain type of tree. So not a pine tree, but what we call a deciduous tree. So it would tell us that those were growing then. This is probably a younger fossil. because of when it grew. Now, sometimes scientists have to crack into those layers to see what was going on underneath. This one is also probably from a riverbed as well, but as you can see, layers have flaked off of the top. See that? In order to expose what's fossilized within. Let's see if we can get a nice clear image of this with the camera. So do you see that right there? It may be difficult for you to see right now, but that is a tiny fossilized insect. So this is also a fossil that would be, and we would know it was from a certain time period because insects didn't always exist. So we would understand that this came from a time when insects did exist. So it could have been any time from actually millions of years ago up until today. Now here's another one from, and you can see a little bit, this one's a little bit delicate. This is the type of thing we do find in the desert quite a lot. And if you look at it, you may recognize the shape. So it's got vertebrae or a backbone running this way, and it's got the outlines of, guess what? Fins. So if we find something like this in a desert, and oftentimes, again, it's under the rocks. So archaeologists, paleontologists, they'll lift off pieces of rocks to expose the fossilized animal underneath. Now, if we find this in the middle of a desert, in a place like Wyoming or in a place like Utah, what does it tell us about what Wyoming or Utah used to be like? Over time, new layers form above the old layers. So say we found this in the earth. Now, this is a fish fossil, and it would be flat on the ground. So let's just say that this is the ground. I'm just going to put it on top of its case. So this is sitting flat on the ground. Now, over time, more layers would build up because things would fall into that stream bed or that lake where the fish used to live, and they would fill it up. So I'm just going to use my book to represent that. So this is like layers of sand and what we call sediment that would build up on top of what used to be the bottom of a lake or a stream. Now, later on, you may have another creature who lives in the same area, perhaps in a different type of environment though. Maybe that stream bed dried up. Maybe now, instead of finding fish, we're finding things like insects. So that would form another layer right on top like that. Now, in real life, there's oftentimes big amounts of sediment and rock that form between each of these layers. Now later on, there could be, and let's see if I have some more layers to put in between. I'm just going to use my books again to show different layers. I'm sort of squishing my fossils there. Over time, you could get something different growing there or something different that existed there, and that would be in the top layer, and so forth and so on. So it's almost like a stack of pancakes where it builds up over time, and as we look through each layer we can tell, well, think about it, would a tree that had a leaf like this be growing in the same exact spot that the fish was swimming in? I don't think it would. So it's going to show us over time that there was a change in that area from water, a water environment at this time in the past, up until up to a growing environment, an earth environment at the point where the leaf may have formed. So this is a very condensed form. Like I said, usually we're looking at much deeper strata, much bigger layers over time. What I just showed you was a model of what scientists call superposition. Superposition describes how those layers of the earth form on top of one another, and the things that get caught in between tell us what was happening on Earth at that time. It's the way we understand the history of the Earth. Now, you can make your own model, and that's what I'm going to show you how to do. So let me just show you mine. This is a superposition model that I made to try to show what kinds of changes might have happened over time here in New England. Now, I will admit I'm making this up a little bit, but as you can see, I've got different layers. I've got a rock layer. I've actually got a volcanic layer in there. I've put another layer. I put some plants, and can you see what that is? And then on the very top, you can probably just barely see, is my last piece of evidence or clue about what's happened. Now, superposition, the law of superposition tells us that what's on top is the most recent thing. And then as we go down through the layers, we're figuring out what happened over time a longer and longer time ago, all the way back in history. So the deepest layer is always going to be the oldest, the middle is the middle, and the top layer is the newest. Can you tell from my hint what happened most recently in the history of the earth here in New England? I bet you can. So I'm going to show you how to make this next. So to make your model, you need a few simple things. The first thing you need is something clear, like a plastic or a glass, it could be cup, and big enough so that you can build layers in it. The next thing you need is the layers. So I actually started with some pebbles, some rocks, because I happen to have them. Sorry, it's sort of dark. Like that. And then I was going to use things like sand, but I don't really have enough around my house. So I decided for my other layers, I would pretend I would use cereal, different kinds of cereal to show different layers in the earth. And here's what, oh, and the last thing you need, which is really important, is you need some clues, because this is like a puzzle, right? So I found some clues that would show different things happening in the history of the earth here in New England. So here's one clue. This is actually a piece of volcanic rock or pumice. I wouldn't expect you to have something like that at your house, although sometimes people do, especially sometimes adults use these in the bath as something to scour their skin with. So that's pumice, because I know that we had volcanoes here at some point. It's actually a piece of pumice I picked up out west. I also know that at certain points we were covered by seas and oceans. So I found a shell that I just happen to have sitting around. I found some twigs and some acorns and things that would represent a time when trees were growing. So that's my twig and acorn collection. And then I needed something that would represent people, because the most recent thing to happen is people. So I just found a penny. I just found a coin, because only people make these. You could find anything, a small toy, anything that would be a sign of people. So that's going to go in my top layer. You could use other things, like I found this feather that I could use to show a time when birds would be flying, and so forth and so on. So that's my collection, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually start building my layers. I'm going to start with the rocks, because I know that if we dig deep down, that's what we're going to find. We're going to find rock down there. Now, I also know that there were volcanoes at some point in our history, so I'm going to put my little piece of pumice right in there with those rocks. Sorry, I think I'm reflecting. I want it so that I can see on the outside, so I can see my clues. Now I'm going to build another layer on top of that, so I'm just going to use some of my cereal. Still want to be able to see all my layers through the plastic, which I hope you can. I'll show you a better image later. Now, what happened next? Well, we're sort of making up this model. We're not trying to be accurate. We're just trying to show superposition over time. So I'm going to say that what happened next was there were plants growing. So I'm going to put in my sticks and my acorns. I'm probably going to have to break these up because they're a little bit too big. But I just want to make sure I can see some of them on the outside. Oops, on the outside of my cup. And then I'm going to put another layer on top. Oh, that layer was very thin, so it sort of disguised my tree layer. So I'm just going to pull some of my tree layer to the side, because we want some clues, because this makes a fun thing to do and show to another person. So there is my volcano layer and my plant layer. And then I'm going to say, okay, so there was trees growing at this time. I'm going to pour in another batch of cereal. And then I think I'm going to put my seashell on top. Do seashells grow in the same place? Do sea animals grow in the same place as oak trees that have acorns? I don't think so. So that shows us that there was a big change, that there were trees growing, and then something happened where the land was covered with ocean water or sea water. Now I'm going to do my final layer on top of that. And again, I would want to pull that a little bit to the side, so if somebody was looking at it, they could tell. I'm going to put the rest of my cereal, and then what goes on top? Well, what's happened most recently? It wasn't volcanoes here in New England. It was people. So right on top is I'm going to put my clue about people. Now the fun thing about this is you can use it kind of like a puzzle. You can show your model to someone else in your family or to a friend over Zoom and try to get them to figure it out. What happened far back in the past? Let's see if we can find a clue. What happened after that? What happened next? I don't think I can find my seashell. I have to pull that out to the side to see my seashell. And what happened last? So that is a superposition model. It's fun to make, and it shows you how geologists and paleontologists look through layers of the earth to figure out clues about what happened before.